examples here, more than I can show you in this session today. But since this is a dev dive session, you will get everything I show you. You can download afterwards and can try it out on your own. So let's get started with a quick agenda. So I'll do a quick introduction, and we had already the questionnaire. So the introduction will be about why doing our API automation, because RPA is very often centered on UI automation. Then I will have an overview about the API technologies and what the UiPath Platform capabilities are, so you understand what to do with which feature or component. And then I will go, the biggest part will be live examples. And then in the end, I will give a quick outlook on what's next. In case you're interested, you're more than welcome to join other sessions. All right, first of all, RPA is, when it started, like 15 to 20 years ago, there was a lot on the user interfaces automated, right? So we introduced like AI recognition here, that we can identify controls as human does for robots. And this allows you more or less to automate anything which is available to a user, no matter if it's a legacy system, it's a web browser or whatever, or some homegrown UI. And this allows you, of course, to automate fully from end to end. And with APIs now, what we have on the right side, this just complements this. This just makes it even more stronger, and you can combine API automation together with UI automation. That means you can potentially start on a screen and pull data out of an API then, which I will show you how that later works, directly from the API itself. But the major difference here is that there is no user interface between the robot and the target system, right? So when you automate an API, you completely skip the UI layer and you directly send, for instance, a request to the target system, which would typically used when you use an UI automation somewhere downstream. And by having this API, by skipping this UI layer, this makes API automation a lot faster. The automation itself is a lot more robust, and it scales a lot better. It's less resource hungry and can be used, for instance, for data synchronization or for populating high volume data transfers, for instance. And on top of that, this also complements your existing enterprise IT strategy, because web APIs, when you, for instance, use your mobile phone or whatever you use, that's everything. Our entire world is more or less integrated via web APIs. Even this is not always visible to you as an end user, but you probably trigger like 10,000 of API calls a day while you're using your mobile phone, right? So the world today without APIs wouldn't probably exist. At least it wouldn't be that fast as it is today. And this is all based on APIs. And you can perfectly integrate this into your robots and leverage API automation capabilities, which I will show you in a couple minutes in the UiPath platform. So what type of APIs do exist? First of all, APIs are a perfect way to get functionality from another system into your product or into your application. Let's say you have a partner API like Salesforce or AWS or Google. This is what we typically call partner APIs, where you usually sign in or you pay some, you get a contract or you log in, then you get an API token where you can use these functions provided by these platforms. And this is what we call typically a partner API. Then there is open APIs, and which is APIs out there in the web you can use completely for free, right? We all use weather apps, for instance, or some of you guys probably use the flight radar, right? So you can plug in your app into one of these APIs and have always, together with a weather widget, and bring just the weather on your mobile device into your app for free months, right? The third thing is, and this is what our session today is mainly focused on, is internal APIs, meaning we cannot build a connector for you as we can do for a partner API. For instance, for Salesforce, we can build a connector for you. I will show that to you later. But for internal APIs, we can't do that for you. So we need to give you the possibility and the capability to scan an open API specification or a Swagger or a WSDL file, right? Something like this, or you craft it manually, right? And this, we have some tooling for that to also support you with your efforts on automating internal APIs, because they very often are very relevant in your business processes, of course. And there is no other option than doing this manually and integrating them from a custom perspective. The last ones are the composite APIs, which usually are assembled out of the ones I mentioned before. Just think about an online shop where you probably have like a payment service involved and product inventory, for instance, or whatsoever. And this then is exposed as one API, and all the other APIs are called downstream. So when we talk about the API technologies, we need to, I want to make one thing clear. Today we'll speak mainly about web APIs, but the web APIs are the ones which are mainly used in our daily business, but of course APIs exist for a very long time, I don't know, since the 60s probably, where Kix mainframe started, the banks transactions, they also happen via APIs. But of course, the most important thing why we can leverage these so easily is because we got the tooling for it. And that means we also can, the effort to integrate into an API is way lower than it used to be in the past, where only programmers could do that. And even if you're not a programmer, if you can't code, you're still here, you're still in the right webinar here, because API automation doesn't really require coding. But nevertheless, I will show you coding, how you can leverage AI to extend this a little bit to some extent. Of course, not everything is possible. So we will focus today here mainly on the typical HTTP JSON protocols, where REST or OData, for instance, and a little less for SOAP. But I've seen that many people are also looking for SOAP and probably also XML RPC, but I guess more people will be interested into SOAP. But I will not have the time yet to look into JSON RPC or WebSockets. We have, for instance, for SAP API, an activity pack, but I will also not be able to look into the message queues. But since so many people asked for this, maybe a follow-up webinar will deal with the other API technologies as well, in case you guys are interested. But my examples are centered around REST today. So I hope that is fine for you. But I think you will get to know our product a little better if you stick with us, even if you're looking for other technologies probably for now. All right, so as you probably know, we have like 2 design times at the moment, 2 major design times. We also have Studio X, but I have this out of scope now. But with Studio Desktop, we have a couple of capabilities, and some of these are also already enabled for Studio Web, which is, for instance, the HTTP web request activity. This is a very lightweight approach where you can get easily started very quick. But of course, if you want to automate a really comprehensive API, the HTTP web request activity probably is not sufficient. But some of you probably haven't seen yet, but this is meanwhile also available in Studio Web. And on the left side, to move on with the services feature, this allows you to scan also service definitions such as a Swagger. I'll show you that, but also you can, for instance, read a Postman collection, or you then could also automate a Postman collection with that. But the way to go nowadays is probably integration service for everyone, because it provides a whole list of standard connectors. So we have a full catalog for partner APIs such as Salesforce, ServiceNow, etc. I'll show you that, but it also allows you to build custom connectors. That means where you can scan, for instance, an internal API and integrate with this one and use it the same way as the standard connectors, and you can publish them. And on top of that, the integration service allows you to do connection management and also more governance and stuff like that. So you don't need to hand over secure strings anymore to your automation engineers anymore. And you can set up a connection, for instance, which then can be used by others in their automations. And last but not least, I will show you also the coded automations. This is AI-generated code, but I will show you how you can generate your own clients. Very simple with our new approach, coded automations, in case you haven't seen that. This is probably also interesting for you guys. And yeah, so let's move on. Let's have a look at the examples I prepared for you. So first of all, for the ones who never did any automation, especially with UiPath, this is UiPath Studio Desktop. This is a rich client which is installed, and you can use it. You install it on your computer, and this is a very powerful automation suite where you can do more or less everything you want. And I have here on the left side the project view. This is where I've prepared the example for you, and this should look very much the same as the project I've uploaded for you. When I went through, before I joined the session, I went through this, I realized I have a couple of typos, so please apologize for this, guys. I was not able to fix this anymore before uploading. So I hope, but it should be mainly in the comments here. So I tried to comment the most of these actions here, so it helps to understand you. But let's have a look into the HTTP web request activity. So I created here, for instance, a test case, but you also can use the same for a workflow. It doesn't really matter. So whatever I show here works in both test cases or workflows. For the ones who don't know yet, we also have a test suite. Test cases work pretty much the same, but not completely. But this is not part of this session yet. Just important for you to know is whatever I have here runs in both worlds, test case or workflow. So let's create a workflow here and how I use the HTTP web request activity. Once again, that's the way to go for you if you have a simple, quick API automation to do. And the way how you find it is like you search here for HTTP request. If this doesn't show up here yet, you can import this via your package manager. You can search, for instance, for web API, and then it should provide the package for you. For the ones who don't know that, this is where you can easily enrich your Studio Desktop with additional capabilities, and that's what this did also as well for the web API activities. Once it's installed, it will also show up when you search for it in here in the search. So if you click on configure, you probably will find some familiar areas here, like an endpoint, right? You could, for instance, just type any kind of URL here. For instance, if you go to the UiPath website, this is a website where we use HTTP. And when I just copy this and paste it in here, then, and I give a preview, what I show is I load the HTML as a response. But of course, this is what we don't really understand is API automation, because when I usually automate an API, I would enter an API endpoint. And if you don't know where to get this from, it is usually very helpful to speak to your developers. It's always good if you're an automation engineer to have good relations with the system owners, or you just Google for the endpoints for your service. Of course, depending on the platform, usually they have pretty good API definition files or descriptions. But what I wanted to point out here is what this is doing is more or less just sending a GET request to an URL, right? And you could use this, for instance, to monitor if your service is up and running, for instance, right? But what I would like to show you here is more like how you can get started with a real API automation. And a lot of you guys probably came in touch with Postman. And in Postman, you know, this is a tool where you also do, it's a very popular tool for API testing. And you have a request, for instance, you can generate curls out of this. If you click on this symbol here, you more or less can create a curl. And this allows you, for instance, with the import here, just to import a curl directly. And then you have, for instance, the endpoint, we just had in Postman. And then we see here, that's the getter function. It also imports the parameters we need here. And if I hit preview, I get like from my Postman pet store, from my Swagger pet store, I get like the response about all the available pets in the pet store. So that's a way how to get started very quick with API automation. And the next thing you would do here is, for instance, checking the log, for instance, where you just print out the status code. But in order to do that, no, again, that's something where you just, in order to do that, you need to, you have here on the right side, sorry, I missed that. This is where you have additional configuration options. For instance, also you can enter a body, and then you can set the output things here, right? For instance, if I want to get the status code, I would just press Control K, press Enter, then it creates a variable. So this variable is then here, and then you can use this variable, for instance, to print out the status. So if we run this, we're doing more or less an HTTP call, and then we print out the status code. And the status code is important for your automation because in case you get a 200, then it indicates that everything went fine. And if you have something else, then you have most likely a problem, and then you need to change something in your API file. You see, status code is 200. That's totally fine. So this is how I got started here. Let's have a look at the example I created here. For instance, I add some text here, combine it with the status to string. If I add a string like this here, I need to make this to string here. And, you know, if I have a status code 200, it's perfectly fine. And then I want to do an additional thing, like checking if something is well formed. And this is something where we hit the first time how to use like AI in this scenario. And I'm invoking here workflow, which is there's like a well-formed check. You know, if you automate an API, it could make sense that you check if your responses you receive are well-formed, or you want to apply a schema validation or stuff like that, right? And so I'm calling here this this helper function. This is what we call a coded workflow, coded automation. And the way I created this is the following. So again, it works coded test case or a coded workflow. It doesn't really matter what you use here. So let me just pick this here because the comment is something I'll reuse here. That's the only thing I will reuse here. So I go into my coded workflow and it starts with this here. Sorry, I need to do copyright. Workflow. And when I paste this in here, I just describe with my own words, generate a function which is taking a JSON string and perform a well-formed check and returns the result as a bool. Right? So that's just what came to my mind, what I wanted to do. I added this into a comment, and then I can click here, generate code, and then we're using our UiPath Autopilot. So what this does is more or less just is using our own UiPath AI service, which is trained in order to serve our users with generating artifacts. And this is what it creates. And we generated the code, and that works perfectly fine for these smaller functions where you can enhance your automation with just generated code. You don't even need to be a developer for that. And because for the simple things, it is very likely you get out something meaningful. I'm not saying that works with all scenarios, but just try to create a meaningful prompt, you know, point out what you want to do, that you have a string, what you want to have as return, what's the input. And then I realized that the results are not too bad, to be honest, right? And even if I'm not a coder, I can leverage this to do that. So let me run this. And of course, this is now using this JSON string, which is more or less just something for debugging, because in the end, we want to take over a string when we call the API. So that works very fine, perfectly fine. So what I will do now is I will move this here into my input arguments, because this is the string, the response we most likely will get. So I enter this here and I uncomment this. And unfortunately, it didn't create my return code. So its return is well formed, for instance. And I need to fix the return because here it says avoid. So I just use the quick action here, fix return time. And that's all I had to do, right? So I just changed the JSON string, which should be checked for well-formed. Here it's the function doing the well-formed check, and then I return this, fix the return time, that's it. And this is how I created this function here, and I just call it in my workflow here for doing a well-formed check. The only thing you need to know here is, in case you have only one output, just use output here, set this to out, and write this into the variable you would like to check afterwards. And hand over the input string, which is the output of the HTTP web request. So that's how I created here. And I created here a verify expression. And this is especially important for test cases because this generates a test result. Here you see an example how to deserialize, for instance, a JSON response. And then I put this into my JSON array. And what I did here is, this is also, because writing these functions here is not always easy, and at least I was struggling with that. So I found it very useful that you can use also an input string for that. For instance, where you just can go into advanced data, use autopilot, and ask it to generate this. I have a couple examples in here where you just can directly embed this here. And then you can access, for instance, you have a string pet name where you can directly get the name of a pet out of the JSON string. And when you run it, you can print it out. I also have the else tree where I'm using, for instance, AI in order to give me an idea what the response status code is about, right? So in case we have an error and the status code is, for instance, 404, it would more or less generate a meaningful comment on this. So I'm using the AI here to just explain the status code in order to help the user or the person who needs to debug this to get him an idea what's the problem in that case. So let's run this. So you guys have all these examples here. Just try to execute them. The only thing where you probably will have to switch is the AI service you will be using, because there is a lot of AI services out there, and we offer connectors for them. And we have also our internal UiPath AI service. You just should be able to switch to that in case you have enabled that in order to get some AI for that. So let me configure this. Let's do an error on purpose. Let's just break here this resource here. So when we execute this, when we see here, you can try to do a preview. We get like the status code, and then we run that. The AI, I will hand over this status code to the AI and let AI express what's the problem in this case. Let me just run this. So we see here we have status code 404, and as the status code means the request resource couldn't be found. So it's an indicator that the request resource probably is wrong, and when you run that, then it should be all fixed now. So the next thing I would like to show you guys is the services feature. Some of you probably have seen this services feature here. This is when you create a new service. You have the option here to scan a whistle file for SOAP services, or you enter a Swagger service definition file, or you can just run a Postman collection, right? If you have a Postman collection, for instance, you can generate an API key, and you have that API key, you just can paste it into this, and it would load the Postman collection, and you can use that as part of your automation. I did this for my Swagger UI bank. So I have a couple links in my presentation. So in case you guys want to try that out, you scroll down here, you will find a couple links for Swagger definition files or to a UiPath testing application, or you'll find also this Swagger file here. So let me just paste this in here. When I load this, it directly loads it from the endpoint. And then you see this is the operation which I described in my service definition. So I did that up front for the UiPath bank. And once you did this, you will find these generated artifacts as part of your installed activities in this activity tab here, right? So if you would go in here, so I selected account, for instance, and I used account create and the login for the login user, like this one. You should be able to use this as a rerun what I provided you, but if you want to build it from scratch, this is where you get it from. And then you just drag and drop this into your workflows. And this is how I created, for instance, the account creation, right? Always componentize your processes as good as you can. And for instance, here I'm creating an account. So one thing is I'm using it for generating test data. I use GenAI, create a friendly name for my private bank account, because test data is also very important. And sometimes, you need to create different test data, but also meaningful test data. So I use just AI to do that. And here is one example, for instance, where I used autopilot, for instance, to assign one of these expressions. Let me just show you that. So I'm using here this comment. I go into this advanced editor, post my question in here, generate a random number between 1 and 9999, and then this is what it returns for me. It doesn't work in any case. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Then you need to find other sources. But I would say like in 50% of the cases, it's generated something meaningful for me. And I need to tell you guys also, this autopilot is also in preview. So we're of course heavily working on this. It's available in the community edition yet. It's not available for enterprise. So in case you open this, you don't find it. It's most likely because you have an enterprise edition, but you can ask for it to enable it for your enterprise if you want to give it a try. So this is how I created all this here with AI generated. So I'm here writing my random number into the account number. I hand over here the friendly name, account type. And when you're using this feature, you can more or less access the properties generated during the scan from an object perspective. So that's beneficial here. And the further you scroll down here, you will see here that's the account create. You just enter your account object, you store the response, have the endpoint here, and here I hand over the bearer token, and then I do all kind of things here on the response, right? So I serialize, I put it into a string so I can print it out. I would say it always makes sense, especially in error situations, to print out the response, because very often the service returns the root cause of your problem if it didn't break entirely. And here I can access, for instance, the account number directly from the response. And again, I do a well-formed check and verify if it is well-formed. So I'm verifying more or less what I received from this invoke method. And then I do a regex check. And I did the regex check very much the same as the others. I wrote the comment here. I took a string here where I said, okay, this is the expected string. And then it just generated the regex pattern for me automatically, right? And again, here I had to fix the return, and I also had to enter the input here, and that's it. That's all I had to do here. Same for generate email. And also I did this for an API call, friends, right? Execute an API call against this endpoint. And you can, for instance, think about handing over a curl or just the endpoint as you did here, and that works, right? So if I just run this, it would return me the response I also had like from before in my simple HTTP web request. So you really can think out of the box with AI. You can use it to generate the code here, the expressions. You can use it for test data. You can help to analyze results. And as you see here, that's the response we received. Yeah, this is more or less about these examples here. There is not enough time to speak about all the details, but explore the autopilot features in here. They definitely help you get going. And last but not least, I would like to speak a little bit about the integration service here. Again, here I'm using data here. I'm generating an email address. And all this is coming from integration service, right? So all the EI connectors or Salesforce, for instance. And the way you do that is Salesforce, you just type it in and then it just should pop up here. This is where coming from integration service. It's not really obvious, but the beauty here is we render a user interface for you, so you don't really see all the hardcore stuff. So if you have never did API automation, you just go there, search for Salesforce, create lead, and then you get a user interface. You don't need to understand how the API works under the surface, right? You fill in a last name, company name, first name. This is what I generated here with EI, or I used some testing activities, and then I print out the lead here. And one thing is worth to mention, a couple of these connectors are not productive yet. So you most likely will, in case this is a preview, it won't show up here. So just make sure if you go into your automation cloud that you enable under automation ops, you enable preview, for instance, right? So you can check this here. Allow users, for instance, also to have activities here. That's the preview. And if you have enabled this, then you need to activate this for your tenant here. You go into your tenant, and then you select, for instance, the rule here. So you can also use preview packages if it's allowed in your company. So this brings me already into UiPath Cloud. For the ones who haven't seen that, that's our cloud UI, where you find all the services we offer here. And I will focus mainly here on integration service and on Studio Web. And the integration service, very quick. The integration service is the component where you can also do some governance, meaning you can, for instance, create connections to a system and then assign them to specific folders where only people can use these connections who are assigned to these folders, right? So you can really make sure that only the people who are allowed to use an integration, for instance, into Salesforce can use it. And you can establish a connection here. You will see, for instance, if a connection is broken, it needs to be refreshed, for instance, but also you can configure triggers, which allow you to do real-time automation, for instance, like in Salesforce, if a new lead gets generated, this would trigger then automation, a platform event, and kick off a process. In the integration service, there is one very important piece here, which helps you with the internal APIs. This is called Connector Builder. And in Connector Builder, you can scan Swagger files, but also you can scan Postman files. Like here, I have a Postman collection. And when you click on import here, you will get all the artifacts described in the Swagger or in the Open API spec. Whistle and SOAP is not supported yet, but this is like a very Postman-like tool, as I would say here, in order to automate or build your own custom connectors, which you can publish them once they're done, and they would also show them up in your catalog, right? Once this is published, like the forms recognizer I built on my own, this would show up here in the connectors catalog and can be used like all the others we built for you, right? So there's the ones we built for you, created for your UiPath. For instance, the forms one is one created by your organization. And this is what you can use in Studio Desktop, as I've shown you before, but also in Studio Web. And in Studio Web, you can do lots of the automations, and especially this is perfectly fine for doing automations on API layers, because because in the web, it's not always easy to access applications which are running on your desktop. So but this can be done as well, of course, but it's perfectly fine for using integrations provided in the integration service to build like comprehensive API automations, as I did here, like for the AI candidate review. So the AI candidate review is a workflow I built for you guys where I use Gmail. I have a manual trigger here, which is better for for debugging, but you could change the trigger, for instance, like an email event or whatever event you would like to have here. You can pick one of these potential events here, and then I would look through my email account, download all attachments. Is this here? Just let's walk through that. I download attachments. I use document understanding to extract the CV from the CVs I find in my email inbox. Right? I have two CVs in my email inbox. One is I faked it, which is probably going to be rejected. And the other one is my own CV, where I will let the AI extract, for instance, and you see here the prompt. Your task is to review the resumes, extract the key data points. So I give it pretty clear instructions what to do. I give it examples, and I also hand over the extracted text from the CV I received from my email inbox. So I would expect now here a data set like this, and I will put this afterwards into a data table, because the data table, sorry, let's move up here. The data table allows me easier access of the CSV table. So I'm asking the AI to return a CSV file, which I put into this data table, and then I will let AI decide if this candidate is a good fit for UiPath product management or not. So I'm using here Azure OpenAI, but you could use also any other AI technology to do that. As far as I figured out, they don't behave too different, but of course you should be very sensitive what AI you're using. You shouldn't just use OpenAI, for instance, in case if it's really CV data. You probably could use the UiPath AI because we offer one as well, or you have your own AI instance deployed. You could also leverage here. So we have an AI decision. We log this here if the candidate is a good fit. We use it here as an example because we get back, for instance, a country name like Czech Republic or United States or something. But Workday needs the 3-character version of it. So I leverage just our AI service here, just return the 3-character international code of this country, right? And this would just then return the 3-character version. So I'm more or less using it as a helper service here. Of course, there would be other ways to do that. You could generate a function which probably would be able to do the same, but this is required and very often challenged to prepare a string. So I can hand it over, for instance, to another service, which is very restrictive. The Workday API, you really need to prepare all the strings up front. And it's good to have some helper here in order to achieve that. And then we write an email to the candidate. Again, here, I also add a context here. I'm an HR generalist, write an email, and yeah. And this will be saved then in an email draft. So we'll let it compose an email. I'll show you the email after that. And then also give a short summary of the candidate because we send this out to our potential manager and product management, explain why this candidate is a good fit. And a couple of rows attach the CV and so on and so forth. This is it. You can review the process in more detail if you like. But one pretty cool thing as well, let the AI explain why it took the decision, right? Because if you're on a triaging, for instance, give me an idea why, right? And this is also very helpful to understand why a decision took place. And of course, if it's not a good fit, explain the rejection, the reason, write an email and say, yeah, it doesn't work for you, your CV is not really something we're looking for, or you're not something you're looking for, and then just also draft an email. So let's run this and see what it does. So I'm debugging it directly here in Studio. Of course, you could publish this then later, and this would work autonomously after publishing this process. So that's the project. So it already started. It's done with the email attachment. It extracts the data. It says, yeah, this guy is called Ferry Horseman and is not a good fit. I'll show you the CV later. And this is my CV. Obviously, I'm a good fit for your UiPath product management. So it's converted the string to A2 because I'm from Austria. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So we should have also a message here in Slack. You see here, that's new candidate arrived, so we informed one. There's a quick summary, then the CV is attached here, and a quick explanation why the candidate is a good fit, and then also attach the Workday pre-hire ID, so I'm already registered in the Workday platform as a pre-hire. And as you maybe remember, I also had the email draft. So here is the email here, we just drafted, you know, where we instructed the AI to compose something where we want to have a follow-up for next week or something. And the other guy is Ferry Horseman. He's, you know, after some consideration, you know, we appreciate your effort, etc., but it won't work here. And I also added some reason here to give the HR manager some context. Maybe he wants to pimp it up a little bit. Why? Because this Ferry Horseman, not much experience in product management. You know, it's a racing horse, obviously, and more skills in gardening and animal care and stuff like that. So this is a workflow where you can heavily leverage AI to do stuff for you. And let's just have a quick recap what I showed you so far, where we leverage AI. And first of all, I showed you guys how to generate code for workflows. I don't say that, you know, you can replace this with a real developer coding skills. But for these helper functions I was using here, that works perfectly fine, right? Very often you just need smaller functions where we don't have an activity yet, right? And you don't know how to code, try it out, right? This is something really helped me. I don't really know coding, and that helped me out very well. Also for the generated code expressions, I think that's a very helpful thing to get sometimes just an idea how these things could work. But still, you know, sometimes I still end up in the forum and still rely on asking people in the forum. But nevertheless, if it helps me like 50% of the cases, that's already something. But where it's really extremely nice is during runtime, right? We can generate test data, we can extract text, we can extract key data, we can put this into a data table, right? For instance, we can use it for decision making, right? Like if you have to have like 100 CVs a day, and let's say 90% of the CVs you follow up and 10% not, then you probably filter out the 10%. You probably should have a second look at them, but you save already at least 10% of your time with the rejected one, right? You need to be cautious where to use that, but with the right prompts, it's a very helpful addition to your daily work where it can help you with high volume, for instance, volume tasks. And in order to make it more reasonable, the whole thing, it can explain the decision. So it gets you a better understanding why you hit the conclusion. But of course, as we all know, it's really good in summarizing text or listing bullets, for instance, why a candidate is a good fit. Just ask for it. Write the prompts in it. There's a lot of blogs out there how to do better prompts. To be honest, I read one or two, and that was totally fine to accomplish what I showed you guys, right? It's really just use your brain, type in whatever you want, give it as much context as you can in order to get the best results out of it. Of course, it can compose emails. And the one thing I found really helpful as well, it can help act as a helper service. Remember where I converted, for instance, the country into thing. It also can help to fix a string, for instance. But there is probably more efficient ways to do that. But nevertheless, you know, if you're, instead of being fully blocked, why not using the AI helper service? If it's probably, if you scale it up, you maybe switch to a more less resource hungry approach on that. So if you would like to see more of AI features here, one thing I would like to recommend is to have a look at the public preview, which just went live last Friday for test execution insights. This is, you know, when you have a lot of test execution results, it is very hard to find out patterns sometimes, but we are using, for instance, AI to generate insights. It will help you to understand better how your automation is set up, where to improve, right? If there is some repetitive things failing constantly, right? But you also can use it for generate test cases. And that's pretty cool. You can, for instance, take a sequence diagram and let's generate test cases out of this based on the decision criteria based on the sequence flow diagrams, for instance. So this is how you can register for this preview here. Just click the link here and you will be able to explore more AI technologies if you wish. And yeah, so that was it from my perspective for this session today. Again, download the examples, look into the projects, and see whenever you struggle, maybe you get some inspiration with API automation techniques. And you can reach out to me, guys. Sync with me or link me with me on LinkedIn. If you have additional questions, of course, we have a QA right now. But if we don't make all the questions, we can follow up with them. But you also always can ping me on LinkedIn. And the next dev dive session will happen on 28th of March, which is about performance and productivity. So with that, I think I hand back to you guys, Christina.
I think if you want, you can leave the Q&A screen on, because we will go now into live Q&A. And I would first like to see who from the audience wants to open up their mic and ask a question. If not, we will go through some questions maybe in the chat, but I see we had help in answering the questions in the chat, and thank you to all the UiPath MVPs who jumped in to answer, and all the other peers who answered, because there were not just UiPath MVPs, but it's great to see the community jumping in to help during these sessions. So you can, each of you, you can unmute and ask Robert your question at this point.
I'm sorry, I didn't see the feedback with the Zoom. I hope you guys could see something here. Because somebody mentioned that, Andy mentioned that this is small and hard to read. Sorry for that. Next time.
Anyone should be able to unmute, so just raise your hand if you want to ask a specific question. Okay. We had some.
I just had the question from the chat, which is who or where would we request access to have that prompt feature on our assigned statements, which I guess would come from the system activities package for the enterprise.
Yeah, the autopilot feature. First of all, this is enabled in the community edition, right? If you use community, you have this automatically. Enterprise, I would say you will have to speak to your customer success manager or reach out to our support that you would like to enable this. This is only on demand.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres, for the question. Let's follow with Pranav and then with Pavan. Pranav?
Thanks, Robert, for such an interesting session. Just a quick question on, first of all, autopilot, since it is in community edition. So what are the licenses charges that are planned for it? If you can throw some light on this first. And my second question was, like, when we are discussing on the web API part, like, is there any plan for the OAuth authorization as well, which is included? Yeah, thanks.
Okay, the first question is tricky. To be honest, I cannot really answer this live now. This is certainly something where you need to work with your sales team, and I don't have the data with me how this is going to be licensed, to be frank, and we need to follow up on that.
We can do as planned and start the forum thread for this session, because I suppose many of you will have these similar questions regarding to this issue, and we will send you the forum thread in the post-event email, and there we can have our other colleagues come in and answer all the details, so you get full information on this.
Thank you, Christina. I think that's helpful, and I think this is a pressing question to answer, but I don't know all the details yet. So the second question was about the OAuth feature. Did I understand right? You were asking about the OAuth feature.
Yes, Robert.
And the OAuth feature in integration service, for instance, that's all embedded, and you have it in there. In the HTTP web request activity, that most likely won't really happen there, right? It is more or is your question targeted on the HTTP web request activity?
Yeah. My question was, well, I know it is supporting the integration services. So my question was on the HTTP activity, whether it is supporting yet or still it is in preview.
I'm not really sure what you mean, what is in preview, because the HTTP web request activity is out there, it's productive, but also integration service is also productive.
Okay, we can discuss later, Robert. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
drop me a message. We can link with me on LinkedIn and we can dive into that.
Sure.
And we just share screens and stuff, and I think that's going to work. But thanks for the question.
Pawan?
Hi.
Hi.
So it's like I just have one doubt over here. We are really from my side, I'm working for the organization, and we are exploring the generative AI capabilities, integration services capabilities there. But the main challenge that we are facing is on the security front. So we go ahead, we do the POC, but at the end, when it comes to the cybersecurity, we do see the issue that they usually ask the question that how secure it is in case if you're doing the integration services with Azure AI, or in case if you're doing the integration with AWS Falcon model, or anything like such. Then does UiPath has any kind of a control on these services, and does it give any additional security features there?
Yeah, good question. I mean, if we provide a whole list of AI integrations like Google Vertex or AWS, and there's Bedrock and so on. So we cannot really speak for these services. This is something you need to clarify with these vendors. And but we have our own AI, UiPath AI, and this is something where I could link you with one of my colleagues, Scott Schoenberger, to discuss this in detail, because the security perspective, it's quite complex in that case. The only thing I can say is with the external AI service, this is where you need to discuss with the providers. With our internal ones, because we run it internally, we just can tell you it doesn't leave our UiPath platform, but this is something where we probably need to dive deeper here, and I maybe need to connect you with my colleague Scott, if that's fine for you. Can you drop your message or ping add me on LinkedIn?
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. Yeah. So usually what happens is like, there are many organizations which are, signing a agreement with UiPath regarding a non-disclosure agreement like such. And in that situation, we are really trusting on the data that we are providing it to you. And via UiPath, in case if there is any security issue, so that's the reason. That was the only intention of checking it. Like if you have really any control on it, and we can rely on that, and we can really go back to our security team and say that, hey, we are using UiPath portal, and it is really secure. They do have a control on all these things. So that was the only intention of asking this.
Yeah, and that makes totally sense. But this is really something I feel like not really enabled that I can answer this in a way and send in a direction now, because that's very sensitive. And I feel like I don't know enough about this aspect here. So I would like to follow up with you in this with a colleague who knows that a lot better.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pawan. Let's go further with Gautam and then with Adrian. Gautam?
Yeah, hi. So actually, see, I have a very little exposure with the API, and I have been into, most of the migration projects. So implementing automations, improving the existing workflows, including SAP and all those things. So as this thing is, this API will be a new thing for me. So what areas I can seek for or suggest the business so that, I can deep dive and I can get any direction for API application into the business applications.
You said you have an API hosted on Linux, and you want to get started with the API to automate it, right?
Yeah, not with the Linux. I said I said I have most of the indulge into most of the migration projects, which includes some performance improvements and time saving with SAP application inside SAP application or Dataverse, Microsoft Dataverse and all. But as those projects were of migration one, I didn't found any API existing things so that I could get exposure. So it's just a kind of direction or some opportunity which I advise, I would say more, so that if I can provide some my input to the business, like at what area we can identify to implement this API thing in the existing process, what could be the best approach or something.
Well, that's very hard to say from the distance, but usually, if you have APIs and you have owners, I would talk to them first. And in general, whenever you think about API automation, try to identify the system owners or if it's a partner API, which is not the case in Europe, but then there is usually extensive docs out there to understand that. But like in your case, yeah, you probably will have to speak to the system owners and see what kind of API is it. Have you request response pairs, or can you give me some direction on that too? But that's all I can give you with what I've understood for now, right? So I hope that's fine for you.
Okay, thanks for this. Yeah.
Thank you, Gautam. You'll be able to address further on the forum thread, because once we open that forum thread, you guys will be also able to ask other questions on the forum thread we open for this session.
Thanks, Christina. Thank you.
Okay, Adrian?
Yes, thanks for the session. Very insightful and few features that I like a lot to see, actually. I have two very specific questions about Connector Builder. Not sure if it's the right part to ask here, but I ask nonetheless. One part is, will it be possible to put through bodies from within UiPath Studio in a connector builder that we've built ourselves? Because I wasn't able to do that so far. And the other, or you can answer and I'll go for the second one.
So you have a JSON body as an example, and you want to paste it in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something will come, right? But I know it's not available yet. Right now, you have to put this into the string-like field. And yeah, but there will be more payload editing capabilities in the future. I can't really tell you when, but if you have probably seen also in the HTTP web request activity in Studio Web, this has already a payload editor already in there, right? And this will come also in Connector Builder. I would say it's just a matter of time, right? And my recommendation to you, if you really need, is filing a support case and ask for it. That's a feature request. And that will just create more awareness. And yeah, then it's probably you get it faster, but it's on the roadmap.
Okay, that's great news, actually, because I've been waiting for this feature for quite some time now. And another thing I noticed on Connector Builder, and I'm not sure if it's a bug. Maybe I have to put it through in the public preview section in the Insider portal. But I'll ask nonetheless. When you define a post request, and sometimes or not sometimes, when you enter a payload to get the fields defined from, then sometimes a field should be a string, but let's say it's a string and it has actually a format of a date. Mm-hmm. And the API actually wants a string, not a date, and UiPath Connector Builder defines it as a date time, and it always changes it back to that. And it's really, really annoying. And I don't know how to get around it. And sometimes I end up setting it back. Like Andy is laughing because he probably faced the same problem.
I faced similar problems, so okay. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. The only recommendation I have, please guys, create incident. And that's because that's the best evidence we have. Evidence we have going to the product team and say, look, the issues. That's what requested. That helps us to prioritize items. But I fully understand what you're talking about, and there is gaps in the product, right? It's just was launched like I think in October, and there's still some stuff to do. Based on your feedback, some things come earlier. So, but thanks for using it and reporting these kind of issues.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a big fan of connector builder, especially because you get deserialized strings and data in Studio, which is very useful to me.
We also take positive feedback, thank you, but even more important, raise the things which are not working for you, right? This really helps us to prioritize the backlog.
Yep.
And also articulate where is it blocking from, right? So if it's really something very important, you can't get over this because of this, let us know. So we understand the severity better. Thank you so much, Adrian.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Adrian. Okay, Andy. I see you. Andy, you want to unmute?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great session. I had a more pragmatic question because, most of the times when we automate or when we write processes to connect with APIs, right? The problem is not much about, getting the API key or, connecting to the API or getting data down. It's the aftermath of all that. It's what happens after, because most API endpoint providers make it very easy to pump data in, but make it that much difficult to get data out, right? You have limits on the number of records you can pull. You have different rules for tokens to expire, right? Given that you said that we don't have to be developers to do this kind of work, which to an extent you have made it very easy. And I guess most of that has been addressed in integration service, right? How would you make that easier for in an environment such as this, right? Given that you're factoring in AI, and if somebody needs to write, API, automation, and then has these kind of, these problems, these nagging problems of, okay, I need to like connect to the API every hour to renew my token, or I need to limit my data to 1,000 records per call. I don't know what the solution is right now, but is there something you can do to make that easier? Because that's a very practical, pragmatic struggling point.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is for sure common issues you have as well. And this is, especially with re-authentication, this is something we can only do in integration service. There's no such thing in the other one apart from rerunning them, right? Or getting a token every time, right, with this authentication. But this is an integration service. We try to tackle all these there. So when your token expires, you get a notification or do some automatic refresh. But this often depends on the API itself, right? Not all the APIs work the same. Some allow this, some others don't allow it, right? But this is number one. If you can expect something like this, some improvements, this will be integration service. But please also raise these requests, but in case you don't find it, or I will let them know now that this is something I can do that for sure. And the other thing is how you get things out. You probably mean also pagination and stuff like that, right? If you have a lot of records and the response would have like, I don't know, 50 megabytes, which is in JSON context a lot, right? And which every parser will almost die with these big payloads. So the pagination, if you look in the connector builder, for instance, is something where you will find this already. Does it work very satisfying in all the scenarios? Not yet, but the concept is basically in there, and it works for some scenarios. But of course, the more use cases and examples we get, the more and more comprehensive we can make that. But yeah, that's a challenge. And the other thing is with the response process, right? I tried to give you some examples how to access in Studio the response. You can either put it into a string and do string operations on it, or you turn it into an object, like with the JSON array I have, right? Where you have more possibilities to access this from an object perspective, right? But I know this is not always easy, especially for lists. If you have huge lists, constraints and stuff like that you need to do. But with the coding feature I also showed is that you could hand over, for instance, a response to a function where you have your own function to extract things, for instance, right? If you had a huge response, you just let it generate that it does some constraining or something like that on the payload itself in order to get the right data out of the response you're looking for.
To your point on code generation, I don't know, maybe I missed it because the font was small, but if AI is generating that code, then there's probably an explanation of the lines that go with it to make it easier for someone to even understand what it is doing, right? If it isn't there, then adding those would be helpful. And the second thing is, you are correct in saying that there is no control. UiPath cannot control the rules set by the API endpoint providers, right? It's their rules. We can't change them. But given that AI is now such a big thing, could there be a framework where we could take the documentation of the API, where it says these are the limits, this is the data limit, and then have the code generator actually look at that and say, hey, by the way, you got some limits on this API, there are some throttling limits on this API, and therefore I've generated this code which might be helpful to you, right? If you want to place repeat requests, or if you want to renew your token, or if you want to go through the list example that you gave, right? Hey, by the way, this thing returns a list, and here is the code if you want to parse through that list, right? Something like that. Could that be like, if not now, in the future, as it gets a little more advanced, could that be helpful? Because even for developers, this is a nagging pain, right? We write API automations, and we have to deal with this all the time. And afterwards, it becomes a bit tiresome, right? But if AI could facilitate that, that would be, I think, a great value add.
Absolutely. And I don't want to say AI gonna do everything and solve everything, but if you follow what we're doing here, we're going into that direction. And I also gave the example with the generated test cases, for instance. That could also be in the future, like where we would like to, what I've seen already, that you can, for instance, in the connector builder, where you just type in the API you want, and it gets the Swagger for you and generates the artifacts for you, right? I haven't thought about the use case you just described, but yeah, I mean, with these capabilities, and I don't want to promise too much, but we could theoretically also file in a Swagger definition. It generates for me out the API test cases for that, which make it happen to deal with such a response payload. But that's maybe a wishful thinking that's going to work. Maybe that's going to work. I can't really promise that, but this is definitely the direction we're pushing for, right? And so I agree with you on that, but we don't have that yet. But if you look at all the AI initiatives we're doing, something like this for API automation is definitely something very, would be very helpful, and for sure something we will have in scope for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy, for the questions. We're 20 minutes over time. We have 2 more questions in the chat, Robert, but I think we can address them in the forum, Fred, if you don't have any more time.
I have time. We can answer another question.
There's a first question from Mendes. Access to code. It says, this workflow on CB analysis and GenAI has piqued my interest. Could I gain access to this project to delve further into the code?
Need to check it. Okay, this workflow on CV analysis has interest. Okay.
About the project you presented, so he would like.
Yeah. The project can be downloaded. You download this file and you just, I can show it. You just can go here, and then there's new project, import project, and then you just import the downloaded file. Let me see if I find it here. This is the DevAI candidate review, the UiP. And here it is. You should have it like this, but of course the connections will not work in your example, but you will get this, right? Of course, this will be empty. Then also you may need to replace this with your own AI service. You may not have this workday integration, this needs to be set up, for instance, but you can reuse that. It's your template.
Okay, think we got that. Thank you. And one more on compliance and privacy. Any thoughts on open AI concerns where it appears AI government global legislation will be more laser focused on future for transparency, compliance, and privacy? This seems like a more general question. So if you want
the problem is, I'm using AI, but I don't build it. So I don't know everything about AI. So I'm just heavily and extensively using it. My core, I have the most experience in API automation. So I think this is something we probably should follow up, and maybe we link these people with Scott and set up a session with him, right? Because he's always eager to get a feedback, especially around these questions. And if you guys bring them up here, they are definitely relevant. But sorry, I'm not the right person to answer these kind of questions. So I hope you understand.
No, definitely. And I see we had huge engagement on this session. So I think the forum thread was a great idea. And maybe we'll spark more sessions out of that forum thread in follow-up. Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you very much to all the MVPs, Andy, Adrian, all the others who have helped during this session. And you will receive the event recording and the deck in the post-event email, and you will also be able to access them on the event registration link, which you already have. They will appear tomorrow. And you'll also receive the forum thread in this post-event email, and I strongly encourage you to engage with us on that forum thread further, since we'll be able to gain more and get the answers for you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for joining. See you.
Thank you. Bye.